Hey guys, tonight we step into a world where the sea is colder than ice cubes in your soda, and the sky feels like it might crush you with its silence. You're wrapped in a fur cloak, the smell of salt and pine filling your lungs as the creak of a wooden longship echoes in your ears. Tonight, it's not just any journey. It's the voyage of the Vikings, the daring souls who may have touched the shores of America centuries before. Columbus was even a rumor in the wind. And just to set the mood straight, let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes on one of these ships. No Wi-Fi, no hot cocoa, no seat warmers, just frozen spray and the occasional seagull giving you side-eye. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching this from anywhere in the world, let me know your location and the time of night you're listening. I love seeing where everyone drifts off to sleep. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the edge of the northern sea, staring out where the horizon melts into a blur of gray. The waves roll heavy, each one looking like it might swallow the world whole. It's the late 900s, and Scandinavia is restless. Farmers fight against thin soil, chieftains argue over power, and families whisper of opportunities across the sea. When your world feels cramped, the ocean isn't a barrier, it's a door. The longship waits, a sleek wooden beast built to cut water like a blade. Its carved dragon head glares forward, daring the waves to try something funny. Historical fact: Viking longships were marvels of engineering. Flexible hulls allowed them to ride waves instead of shattering against them, which is probably the only reason so many voyages were even possible. Quirky tidbit: some sagas suggest that when crews weren't rowing, they sang long, drawn-out chants, partly to stay awake, partly to scare off spirits. Imagine a boat full of burly Norsemen belting out the Viking version of karaoke. Historians still argue whether these chants were real sea shanties or later embellishments added for dramatic flair. As you step aboard, the deck shifts under your feet. Salt water sprays across your face, and you clutch the side, trying not to look like you're about to hurl. The oars slap rhythmically, and the sail rises like a giant pale wing. Suddenly, the coastline shrinks, and home becomes nothing more than a smear of green and brown in the mist. Your stomach growls. Dried fish and hard bread make up most of your meals. Think of it as the Viking version of trail mix, except less fun and more chewy. The nights are worse. Freezing wind sneaks under every blanket, and the stars refuse to give you warmth. Joke 1. You realize quickly that the only in-flight entertainment is guessing which crew member snores the loudest. Spoiler: it's Bjorn in the back. The journey feels endless. Days blur into nights, and nights blur into the same water, the same sky. You start to understand why sagas describe the sea as alive. It heaves and growls like some ancient animal you're trying to ride. Neutral narrator voice slips in. At this time, Norse explorers were not just raiders. They were traders, settlers, and wanderers. Their colonies reached as far as Iceland and Greenland, always pushing outward, like the sea itself demanded it. But here, in the middle of the ocean, you're mostly worried about your toes going numb. The crew tries to keep spirits up with tales of lands full of game and timber, but the uncertainty is sharp. Open question phrase: Historians still argue whether the Vikings were guided by deliberate knowledge of distant shores or just stumbled westward thanks to storms and curiosity. A gull appears one morning, circling above the mast. Everyone stares. It means land is near, or at least something other than endless water. Your heart lifts. Joke 2. Someone mutters that if it's just another ice-covered rock, they're going to sue Odin. Good luck finding a lawyer out here. Finally, the outline of a distant coast rises, dark cliffs shouldering the sky. The crew cheers, though it's half relief and half sheer disbelief. You've made it across a part of the world most people never even dared to imagine. For a moment, the fear fades, replaced by awe. Then reality sets in. You're not home, and whatever waits here might be stranger than the sea itself. The boat creaks forward, prow cutting the waves, carrying you toward something both terrifying and wondrous. The northern horizon has shifted, forever. Joke 3. As you brace for landfall, someone jokes that if the new world doesn't have ale, the whole trip was pointless. Priorities, right? The wind sharpens, the sail snaps, and the land grows closer. You take a breath, ready to step onto soil no one you know has ever touched. The ship grinds softly against a shingle beach, and the silence is broken only by the crash of waves and the sigh of the wind. You step ashore, legs wobbling after days of rocking on the long ship. For a moment, you savor the feeling of solid earth beneath your boots. The air smells different here. Cleaner somehow, sharper, like pine resin and distant smoke. Yet even as your senses adjust, you realize this isn't the end of the journey. It's just the beginning of the tales that will ripple through fjords and farmsteads far away. You sit by a fire that night, flames painting gold across the crew's tired faces. The sagas are born in moments like this, half memory, half imagination. One man begins a story of gods who shape winds and steer ships, and soon others are adding verses of giants and heroes. Joke 1. You notice the line between serious history and fun bedtime exaggeration is thinner than your blanket. It doesn't matter. After all, the best way to make it through cold nights is to laugh, even if the punchline is that Thor once lost a wrestling match with an old woman named Old Age. At home in Scandinavia, these fireside tales spread like sparks in dry grass. People hear of the westward voyages and pass them down as family lore. Children grow up imagining their parents' ships battling sea monsters, their ancestors dining in great halls on foreign shores. Historical fact, the sagas, such as the saga of the Greenlanders and the saga of Eric the Red, were written centuries later, but they preserve oral traditions that kept these voyages alive in memory. Quirky tidbit. Some storytellers would deliberately exaggerate certain details, like describing cows the size of mountains or winters that lasted forever, because apparently accurate storytelling was less fun than scaring kids into eating their porridge. Historians still argue whether the sagas reflect real geography or are stitched together from myth and memory. You lean closer to the fire, warming your hands. The crew exchanges fragments of news to weave into the stories. One talks about settlements in Iceland, another about farms eked out of Greenland's rocky soil. There's pride in their voices, but also unease. Life at the edges of the world is no fairy tale. It's survival against frost, famine, and neighbors who occasionally argue with axes instead of words. Joke 2. Imagine a Viking version of Neighborhood Watch. Basically, everyone standing around comparing sword lengths. Still, there is wonder. Someone mentions Greenland's farther west. a whisper of places with forests thick enough to build 100 ships. The fire crackles, and you feel the possibility glowing brighter than the flames. Even if it's just rumor, it's a rumor strong enough to pull families from their homes and set them drifting into the unknown. Neutral narrator voice. Storytelling in Viking culture wasn't just entertainment. It was instruction, binding, and persuasion. A good saga could encourage exploration, justify a chieftain's power, or even frighten someone into obedience. In societies where writing was rare, memory and imagination carried more weight than parchment ever could. Your head tilts back, eyes tracing sparks rising into the night. You imagine how these tales will echo across generations, shaping not only the lives of the listeners, but also how entire continents will be remembered. Open question phrase. Historians still argue whether these stories were primarily historical records, moral lessons, or simply epic bedtime yarns meant to keep children dreaming of glory. The night deepens, and the fire burns low. The sagas continue, filled with laughter, warnings, and dreams. Someone swears he once saw a whale the size of 3 longhouses. Another insists that Odin himself sent a raven west to guide explorers. Joke 3. One of the crew sighs that if Odin is handing out birds, he hopes for a seagull that doesn't poop on his shoulder. The laughter lingers, blending with the hiss of the fire and the endless rhythm of the sea. Wrapped in furs, you close your eyes. Tomorrow will bring harsher work, cutting wood, fixing sails, and maybe chasing those wild rumors. But tonight, you drift into sleep to the sound of sagas. Each story a flicker of hope for lands not yet seen, lives not yet lived. Dawn comes pale and cold, brushing the horizon with streaks of silver. You rise stiffly, shaking off the night's chill, and feel the weight of expectation settle like a cloak across your shoulders. The stories you heard by the fire linger, each one painting new worlds in your imagination. But dreams bend to survival. To reach those worlds, you need stepping stones, and Greenland is the one everyone talks about. The voyage west stretches wider than thought itself. You keep the morning sun to your left, the swell under your feet, and the wind as an occasional ally. The helmsman reads waves like a scribe reads ink, and you learn to watch for signs. The curve of a cloud band, the scatter of kittiwakes, the sudden scent of cold that hints at drifting ice. Neutral narrator voice. Norse navigation relied on practical observation and dead reckoning. Later traditions even whisper about sunstones, crystals, that might reveal the sun's hidden position through clouds. An intriguing possibility, but not a settled fact. Historians still argue whether those stones were real tools or clever legends sailors told to impress dinner guests. Days unspool into a rhythm. The sea is not always a monster. Sometimes it is a mirror. Whales roll like moving hills. Once, a dark fin slices the water and vanishes, and someone swears it winked at you. The longship rides swells with feline grace, flexing rather than fighting, oak ribs creaking in a language of their own. You chew dried fish and hard bread, softening the edges with a splash of seawater, because that's what passes for sauce. You promise yourself a feast of something green someday, even if it's just a heroic turnip. Joke 1. You declare the menu ocean to table, which sounds fancy until you realize the table is also wet. Iceland ghosts by on a distant day, a smoky backbone on the horizon. The next leg is harsher. Pack ice drifts like shattered marble. Fog turns the world to a whisper. The crew knots ropes around waists so no one wanders overboard. You move as one organism, cautious and deliberate. Historical fact. Around 985 CE, Eric the Red led settlers west from Iceland and established Norse colonies in Greenland, most notably the eastern and western settlements, anchoring Europe's farthest farms along cold fjords and narrow meadows. Land appears as a darker line against gray, cliffs shouldering the sky, a fluted fjord opening like a doorway. Ice calves in the distance with a sound like slow thunder. You ground the ship in a sheltered inlet and kneel, pressing your palm to unfamiliar soil. It is not friendly, not hostile, just indifferent. Above the tide line, scrub and wildflowers freckle the slope. Another ship ghosts in behind you, and then another. This is no visit. This is intent. Eric's farmstead, Brattahlid, rises plank by plank, turf by turf. You stack sod walls and lay driftwood beams, then roof the hall with layers of grass that grow shaggy and green, a house wearing a hat. Smoke threads through the roof vent and disappears into the high air, a small human signature in a vast place. You haul stones to mark boundaries, because even at the end of the world, neighbors prefer clarity. Joke 2. Someone proposes an open concept floor plan, but you decide walls are useful when winter is trying to move in uninvited. Summer becomes a frenzy. You cut hay wherever grass dares to grow, ferrying armfuls to low barns that smell of sweetness and sweat. Sheep nose through the stubble. A few sturdy cows breathe little clouds into the morning. You learn quickly that animals are futures on legs. Hay is time stored against the dark. Neutral narrator voice. Norse Greenlanders survived through a mixed economy. Pastoral farming, seal and caribou hunting, fishing, and especially trade in walrus ivory and furs that linked this icy edge to European markets. The tusks gleam like folded light, proof that even the farthest places can plug into distant desires. A small chapel rises near the hall, its bell modest but determined. Children chase each other between turf walls. The law thing gathers on a flat patch of ground where voices pass judgments and sometimes pass bread. You hear the softer endings of disputes, handshakes, not shields. People remember why Eric came here. After feuds where men perished, exile felt safer than more stubborn arguments. The land absorbs the memory without comment. Then comes the price. Winter arrives like a long, slow argument that refuses to end early. Sea ice hems you in. The world turns the color of iron. You ration butter like treasure and whisper to the cows to keep them calm. Sometimes a seal surfaces in a black hole of water, eyes glossy as the moon, and you feel both hunter and guest. By lamplight, you stitch a cloak with bone needles, the flame making shy halos on the wall. Joke 3. You call the finished look Arctic couture, which is a generous way to describe a blanket with aspirations. Driftwood becomes sculpture and structure and spoon. Every scrap matters. Timber is precious enough that you learn the shape of each beam the way you'd learn a friend's face. When a storm scatters trees along a nearby beach, you celebrate like merchants striking silver. Neutral narrator voice. Because Greenland lacks extensive forests, settlers depended on driftwood, imported planks, and barter for building timber. That scarcity helps explain why rumors of wooded shores farther west felt less like dreams and more like strategy. You map the coast by memory, a tooth-shaped rock here, a waterfall threading a cliff there. On a rare, clear day, the fjord glitters as if someone spilled stars into it. For an hour, you believe in the green of Greenland without qualification. Then a chill gust returns, and the illusion folds like a tent. Two truths settle beside you. This land can cradle you, and it can shrug you off. News drifts in with stubborn persistence. A cousin's boat brings word of farms to the north, smaller but determined. A hunter returns with a length of straight-grained wood that looks fresh cut, not wave-gnawed, as if shaped by hands you do not know. A sailor swears he saw a shoreline farther west, where the sand sparkled like ground bronze, and trees marched down to the tide. Quirky tidbit. Saga tellers later claim Eric named the place Greenland to make it sound inviting, a medieval marketing strategy that proves the real estate pitch is eternal. Whether clever branding or just wishful naming, the story sticks because it feels true to human nature. Trade binds the settlements to the wider world. Ships carry tusks and hides east and return with iron, cloth, and gossip that grows taller on the voyage home. A priest reads a letter from Iceland and stumbles over the line about timber enough for 100 halls somewhere beyond. The phrase passes from mouth to mouth until it feels less like news and more like gravity. You sharpen your axe and your curiosity with the same careful strokes. At Brattahlid, you help raise a new buyer, hands salted with work. The hall smells of peat smoke and stew. Someone sings a work song that is half prayer, half dare. You look up through the smoke hole and imagine stars, even though the daylight insists on staying. A raven wheels across the sky and disappears to the west as if it has an appointment. You decide you want one too. Practicalities tug your sleeve. You mend sails, check lines, and barter for cheese you swear you won't eat early. The helmsman scratches a plan into sand. Follow the coast while it helps, then leap across open water when the wind turns friendly. If the gods are kind, or merely distracted, you'll return before hay barns run thin. If not, you'll bring back a story, and sometimes stories are the only currency that grows interest in the dark. Open question phrase. Historians still argue whether a brief, warm spell truly made Greenland farming secure or merely survivable, masking the costs until the ice retook its rent. You listen to the breeze slide down the fjord and think the answer may be both, comfort and caution, braided like rope. When night settles, the hall glows like an ember under sod. You lie awake listening to the hush of the fjord and the faint scrape of ice, a soft reminder that nothing waits forever. In the dark, a thought arrives as quietly as snowfall. The edge of the world is not a cliff, but a meadow you haven't walked yet. Morning will bring more work, and sails rising like wishes. Somewhere beyond this careful life, there may be forests tall enough to dream beneath, and rivers that never freeze, and beyond those, perhaps, a farther shore. Days at Brattahlid stretch long with work, yet rumors slip in like drafts through the turf walls. Sailors come back with stories of drifting logs that could not have grown on Greenland's austere slopes. Hunters claim they have watched bands of birds winging in from the far west, as if commuting from a shoreline you cannot see. By the hearth, voices lower. Someone saw beaches that glittered like ground bronze. Someone smelled thick pine resin. Someone traced a dark line of land beyond fog, like a secret written just out of reach. You listen because in a place where everything is scarce, the right rumor is almost a tool. You pay attention because talk can be as valuable as iron when timber runs thin. A trader spreads a sealskin map on the table. really just memory scratched with lines, and taps 3 spots with a blunt finger. Here for pack ice, here for open water, and here, farthest west, for a shore he swears was lined with trees. Joke 1. He cannot draw a straight line to save his life, but everyone politely agrees the wobbly snake is definitely a coastline, and not a very determined worm. The room laughs, then leans forward again. Laughter never lasts long when survival is the next item on the agenda. Neutral narrator voice. Later saga traditions speak of Bjarni Herjolfsson, a merchant blown off course in the late 10th century, who sighted unknown lands to the west yet did not land, since his ship was not provisioned for exploration. Historians still argue whether he truly saw multiple coasts or stitched a tale from other sailors' reports, but the image of a cautious captain glimpsing opportunity and turning back fits the improvisational world of frontier sailing. Stories like his move faster than ships. They cross benches and seasons, sharpening as they travel. Driftwood keeps arriving, long, straight pieces with bark you do not recognize. A carver runs his thumb along one and murmurs that it works like butter beneath a sharp knife. In a place where every beam is a promise, such wood feels like a prophecy. Historical fact. Greenland lacks extensive forests, so Norse settlers prized imported or drifted timber for ships and hauls. The pull of wooded shores to the west was practical, not merely romantic. A haul without beams is a story without breath. You listen as pilots compare sky signs. When clouds stack like shields and the wind smells faintly of soil, they say land is near even if your eyes can't find it. One veteran swears by releasing ravens. If a bird circles back, you hold course. If it arrows away and vanishes, you follow. Quirky tidbit. Some later writers even claimed mariners could taste land in the air or hear it in the rhythm of swells, part observation, part poetry, and part placebo with excellent branding. Out on the fjord, a raven lifts from a roof and draws a line into the gray, and you feel your thoughts hitch a ride. On clear days, the sea turns metallic blue, and the horizon grows teeth. You practice patience, the art of watching for what refuses to arrive on command. Joke 2. Someone suggests painting, "Dear West, please RSVP" on the sail. The motion fails only because you do not want the gods to think you're needy. Mariners snort and tug at lines. Neediness is for poor rigging, not for people who read the sky. Stories broaden like tidewater. A hunter says he found a broken oar of unfamiliar wood. Another recalls a shore where birds were so thick the sky looked peppered. A third brings back berries that stain fingers purple, and a boast about fish so plentiful they practically begged to be dinner. Historians still argue whether these were glimpses of several places or one long coast misremembered in pieces, but the effect is the same. Imagination acquires coordinates, and a rumor starts sounding suspiciously like a plan. Neutral narrator voice. The sagas compiled in the 13th century, the saga of the Greenlanders and the saga of Eric the Red, describe lands west of Greenland by qualities rather than distances. One is rocky and slabbed, later called Helluland, stone slab land. Another is thick with woodland, later called Markland, forest land. A third is milder, with wild grapes or at least something like them, called Vinland. While exact identifications remain debated, those labels show how sailors mapped by texture and use. Stone for shelter's limits, forest for shipwright's hope, sweetness for winter's memory. You test the new stories against old skills. At noon, you mark the sun's height with the edge of your hand. At night, you count breaths between swells. Fog sits where it always sits, and then one day it doesn't. In your palm, a chip of foreign wood feels like a small, warm lie. Too perfect, too smooth, as if shaped by hands just out of sight. You pocket it anyway. Even a lie can be useful if it points the right way. The fjord gives nothing freely. You learn to accept hints. At the law thing, voices circle like gulls. Some argue the farms are fragile and men should stay close, stack hay, and trust patience more than dreams. Others point at the hall's ribs and the ship's planks and ask a practical question. With what wood? Joke 3. One farmer announces he will plant a mast and water it until it grows a ship. The laugh is brief because everyone secretly wishes it would work. Between humor and worry, a consensus grows. If the West holds forests, someone must go and see. Boat builders begin quietly hoarding iron rivets. A cooper promises extra casks for water or wine or wild guesses. Mothers lay out cloaks stitched with simple runes for luck, then fold them again and again, as if the cloth might learn prudence by repetition. Neutral narrator voice. The economy at this edge depends on balancing risk and routine. Too much wandering and barns empty, too little and trade withers. Rumors of the West tug at the balance where it is already thin, and the tug feels unignorable. You help caulk seams with tar that smells like smoke, and forests you haven't met yet. By night you lie awake, counting distances you do not know. The wind tells only half the story and leaves the rest hanging like a riddle. Historians still argue whether the first verified crossings were carefully planned expeditions or opportunistic rides on weather. But from where you sit, the distinction feels academic. Intent or accident. Either way, oars still bite water, and wakes still point like arrows. A peddler brings a scrap of cloth, dyed a color you cannot name, somewhere between berry and sunset. He says it came with a length of straight-grained wood, and a story from a cousin's cousin, who swears the trees out west grow like spears and vows. Another rumor drifts in with him. Great Ireland, a legendary western land mentioned by some medieval writers. Whether garbled hearsay or sailors' daydreams, it adds spice to an already crowded stew of possibilities. You don't need legends, you need lumber. Still, it's hard not to taste the legend on your tongue. Even the priest cannot stay neutral. He speaks of stewardship and prudence, then lingers over the idea of building a larger church with beams that do not bend like driftwood. He does not say, "Go," but he also does not say, "Stay." And silence becomes a vote when winter listens. You begin to sort the rumors like a merchant sorts wares. The gaudy boasts go to one pile, the repeatable details to another. Birds arriving from the west, unfamiliar grain in driftwood, currents that nudge bows toward sunset, a belt of milder air a few days beyond the ice. You stitch a mental chart from hints and hunches, and against reason it holds. Neutral narrator voice. In communities like this, a single decisive person can turn drift into current. Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, will soon outfit a ship and crew to test what others only whisper. Historical fact. Leif's voyage west is a standard part of Norse exploration narratives, commonly dated to around the year 1000. Whether prompted by Bjarni's sighting or by independent ambition, it marks the pivot from rumor to attempt. The talk around the fire changes tone. Someday becomes soon. One evening, as the sun slides along the horizon without quite committing to night, you watch a raven launch from the hall roof and arrow west. The bird looks like a piece of midnight with plans. The water in the fjord briefly lies flat, a polished thought. You feel the answer arrive, simple as breath. You cannot fence the sea, and you cannot hoard possibilities. The only test for a rumor is a wake running toward where it points. Tomorrow, you will sharpen axes. Tomorrow, you will count crew and casks and quiet prayers. For now, you listen to the hush in the turf-walled hall and the slow heartbeat of the waves against the stones, and you picture a coastline dark with forests, waiting like an unopened letter written in a hand you almost recognize. The morning breaks sharp and clean, gulls wheeling like scraps of parchment against the pale sky. You pull your cloak tight and feel the shift in the air. The settlement hums with more than ordinary chores. Men hammer planks into place, women sew extra cloaks, and even the children seem quieter, as if they know the day is picking up its anchor. Word passes quickly. Leif Erikson is fitting out a ship. He does not shout. He does not need to. Resolve has its own volume. You shoulder a coil of rope and find your place among the hands. Because when the West begins calling, you answer by doing. Leif walks the strand with the unhurried certainty of someone who trusts both the hull and the horizon. He checks seams with his palm, studies the grain of a mast, like a reader running a finger under a good line, and nods once to the helmsman who has already memorized a dozen sky signs for the open water. Neutral narrator voice. According to the sagas, Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, sailed from Greenland around the year 1000, inspired in part by reports of land sighted to the west. This voyage is widely accepted as the earliest European expedition to North America, with surviving narrative detail. Historians still argue whether he purchased Bjarni Herjolfsson's ship or merely borrowed Bjarni's stories. But either way, the idea has grown feet. You help load casks until your shoulders feel like they've been replaced with stones, dried fish, water, sour whey, a little ale for morale, spare cloaks, iron tools wrapped in cloth so they do not clink out bad luck. Ropes are coiled, then recoiled, because neatness is a superstition that actually pays off. Joke 1. Someone proposes a pre-voyage safety talk. Step 1, don't fall in. Step 2, if you do, reverse Step 1. It gets a laugh, and laughter makes good caulking for fear. A priest blesses the ship, his voice thin in the fjord wind. A small cross hangs near the prow, and several older men glance away, remembering the old gods while letting the new prayers work if they can. Historical fact. Leif spent time in Norway and accepted Christianity under King Olaf Tryggvason, later helping introduce the new faith to Greenland. Whatever your private devotions, you find it hard to argue with a bit of extra protection when the sea is the kind of neighbor that knocks without waiting. Brattahlid recedes the way places do when you are measuring them against something larger than your eyes can hold. Oars bite water, the sail unfurls like a pale wing. The sea takes your weight and answers with its own breathing. You keep the familiar coast to starboard while it helps, letting cliff and headland spell their names on the day. The ship settles into that cat-stride rhythm you learn to trust, the kind of glide that tells you the hull and the swell have made temporary peace. You study Leif the way sailors study weather. He listens more than he speaks, lets the crew offer their small map of hunches, then sets a course that feels both simple and inevitable. Quirky tidbit. Some later tellings claim Leif earned the nickname the Lucky after rescuing shipwrecked sailors on a return voyage and still making landfall with cargo intact. Good marketing for a captain, even better for a legend. Whether the nickname predates the journey or was sewn on later like a patch, it fits the mood on deck. Preparation meeting the kind of chance you can actually use. Clouds thicken, then thin. The wind switches personalities like an actor changing masks. You watch for seabirds that do not stray far from land, for stray logs that might mean a forested coast is upwind, for the subtle shift in swell that can mean underwater shelves and, beyond them, beaches. Neutral narrator voice. Navigators in the North Atlantic relied on dead reckoning, bird watching, watercolor, and the sky's clarity near the horizon. Some traditions also mention sunstones, crystals that might reveal the sun through cloud cover. Historians still argue whether those were practical tools or poetic add-ons, but you would not object to a pocketful right now. Days stack, one plank on another. The crew's jokes get thinner the farther you row from home, but thin laughter still counts. Joke 2. A deckmate claims he can smell pine from 2 days away. You tell him that would be impressive if his nose weren't currently full of fish. He grins and says the fish smell like pine to him, which, honestly, would be a welcome change. You both agree never to open that particular cask again unless absolutely required by fate or boredom. One dawn, the fog lifts like a blanket pulled aside by a gentle hand, and you catch a smear of darker gray on the edge of the world. At first it plays tricks. There, not there, there again. And then the line acquires shoulders and a certain stubbornness. Land. The word moves through the ship the way fire moves through dry tinder, fast and inevitable. You do not cheer, you breathe. Breathing seems safer. Historians still argue whether this first sight belonged to what would later be called Helluland. Broad, stone slab shores many identify with Baffin Island, or if the bow was already angling toward another coast entirely. The uncertainty does not diminish the relief of contour where there was only theory. Leif keeps the ship just outside surf, feeling for currents with a patience that could teach stones. He does not rush the shore like a hero in a song. He rides parallel, counting coves, tasting the air, and letting the coastline introduce itself before shaking hands. Neutral narrator voice. The sagas describe multiple landfalls in sequence. Stone country, forest country, then a milder region named Vinland, suggesting reconnaissance rather than a single dramatic leap. This ship behaves like a scout, not a battering ram. The land grows starker as you glide along it. Low mountains shoulder the sky, beaches wear a thin ribbon of pale sand, flat shelves of rock look like tables set for stern company. You note places to beach if the wind turns mean, count river mouths dark with silt, and learn the outline's grammar. Blunt point, shallow bay, long strait, then again. Joke 3. Someone mutters that if the stones could talk, they'd say, "Welcome, please wipe your boots, and also don't plan to farm here." A few nod. Farming would be an argument you'd lose. You lower a line and pull up a fish that gleams as if forged, then another. The water is generous, even if the ground looks unamused. On a ledge, high above the tide, you spot white dots that might be birds, or might be your own wishfulness pecking at distance. You store both possibilities in the same pocket, because that is how exploration works. You collect maybes and spend them carefully. Leif confers with the helmsman and points further south. The prow tilts that way, patient and decisive. Quirky ideas bloom among the crew. One sailor swears he can feel a softer breath in the wind, as if the air itself has less bite the farther you go. Another says his shoulders ache less, which he chooses to interpret as scientific proof of better weather. You let the banter roll because optimism is also a kind of food. Hours turn to another day, and the rock-rude coastline begins to blink with the occasional stitch of trees. Not many yet, but enough to make hearts rise in ribs. Historical fact: the Norse sources distinguish a progression: Helluland for stone, Markland for forest, Vinland for a milder, richer place, reflecting practical categories sailors cared about: building, burning, and possibly planting. You do not know which name belongs here. Only that the ship's mood is loosening like a fist deciding not to stay clenched. As evening falls, the sea flattens into polished slate, and the sky salts itself with stars. The coast holds to port, like a promise stated without flourish. You coil a last rope and lean on the gunwale, letting the cold air rinse your thoughts. The ship hums in its bones, a low, contented sound you have come to trust. Somewhere ahead, the shoreline will change its argument from stone to wood, from refusal to maybe. For now, you stand between a past that already feels light as smoke and a future that smells faintly, daringly, of resin. Morning paints the horizon in pale gold, and the coastline sharpens into focus. What you see is not generous earth or beckoning forest, but a stern face of stone. Flat slabs stretch inland, barren and gray, as if the world here has been hammered into one vast anvil. The prow nudges closer, and the ship's keel rattles against gravel that feels too blunt to call a beach. This, you realize, is not a place for farming, feasting, or settling. This is Helluland, stone slab land. The name feels obvious, though it won't be written down for centuries. You step ashore cautiously. The rock holds heat from the morning sun, but little else. Lichen clings in stubborn patches, and a few hardy seabirds wheel overhead, unimpressed by your arrival. Joke 1. One sailor kicks a pebble and sighs. Well, that's dinner sorted, pretending to chew air. Everyone laughs because if you don't, the silence might swallow you instead. Neutral narrator voice. The saga of the Greenlanders describes Helluland as the first landfall west of Greenland, a place covered in great stone slabs and home to white foxes. Most scholars equate it with Baffin Island, though some push the idea north or south. Historians still argue whether this description was first-hand observation or a storyteller's embroidery, but the geography matches too neatly to ignore. You climb a rise and gaze inland. It's all the same. Broken rock, shallow pools, the occasional scatter of scrub like an afterthought. You imagine winter here, wind screaming without trees to slow it, snow piling into every crack. Life would find it difficult to take root, and you cannot imagine building homes where even grass hesitates. Quirky tidbit. Later tales mention giant stepping stones along this coast, and sailors swore they were made by trolls stretching their legs. You smile at the thought of mythical giants using this landscape as their personal gym, stomping through boredom while humans scurried along the edges. Leif gathers the crew. There's no debate. This isn't a place to linger. The water, though, offers bounty. Nets lowered into the shallows come back flashing with cod, fat and plentiful, as if the sea itself compensates for the land's stinginess. You salt the catch quickly, storing away food for voyages yet to come. Joke 2. One deckhand complains he'll start sprouting gills at this rate, and another replies that it might improve his singing voice. Even the cliffs seem to echo the laughter back, though it could just be the wind making fun of you. Back aboard, you follow the coastline south. The air sharpens, colder than you hoped. Icebergs float like wandering palaces, glittering but threatening, forcing detours that chew away at time and patience. Neutral narrator voice. Archaeologists have found traces of Norse presence on Baffin Island, odd yarn fragments and wooden artifacts that hint at contact. But whether they represent temporary camps, trade, or accidents remains unresolved. Historians still argue if the Norse truly stopped here for long or only in passing. The coastline repeats itself like a stubborn chant. Cliff, slab, ledge, scree. A fox darts between boulders, its fur as pale as snow. You watch it vanish and think about the sagas describing these creatures. Their survival a quiet reminder that not all life needs fields and barns. Still, human dreams are heavier, and they demand more soil than this land is willing to lend. The crew grows restless. Shoulders ache, tempers fray. Leif calms the mood with a gesture, steady and certain. He reminds the men that even barren shores are signposts. Each land, whether kind or cruel, pushes you closer to the one that will open its arms. Historical fact. The sagas describe Leif's voyage in stages, first Helluland, then Markland, then Vinland, marking a clear progression from stone to forest to fertile earth. This narrative rhythm mirrors the way sailors measured hope, not in miles, but in changes of scenery. Evening lays its long hand over the deck, and you catch one last glimpse of Helluland's cliffs in the fading light. They look eternal, as if carved before time itself. Joke 3. Someone mutters, "If Odin wanted us to stay here, he'd have left a tavern." And the whole crew agrees a pint would certainly improve the scenery. Instead, you hoist the sail and watch the stony land shrink behind you, dissolving into dusk. The sea smooths overnight, almost kindly, as if rewarding you for resisting the temptation to despair. Stars wheel above, so bright they feel close enough to pluck. Somewhere ahead, the land will change its face. Stone will give way to wood, and the promise whispered around fires in Greenland will take root in your own chest. You tighten your cloak, brace against the cold, and lean forward into the wind, certain now that this journey is more than rumor. It is momentum, and momentum is a promise in motion. By dawn, the coastline softens. The hard jaw of stone eases into shoulders of sand and long, dark bands that ripple like combed velvet. When the wind swings around, a new scent walks aboard. Sharp, green, resinous. You breathe it and feel your ribs lift on their own. The oars come in. The sail spills wind. The longship ghosts along a lee where waves forget to argue. Ahead, a fringe of forest leans over the shore, pines and spruces crowding each other like people at the first warm market of spring. You taste the word before anyone says it. Markland, forest land. The keel kisses gravel and holds. Boots splash, hands steady the hull. You step onto a beach stitched with drift and seaweed, then into the first rank of trees. The world changes temperature and color in one stride. Under the canopy, the light turns cathedral soft, the air damp and generous, smelling of pitch and crushed needles. You press your palm to a trunk and feel stored sunlight running under the bark. Someone taps a straight sapling and grins the way a shipwright grins in his sleep. Joke 1. Another sailor pats a towering pine and whispers, "At last, a mast that doesn't give me splinters just by looking at it," then immediately gets a splinter for tempting fate. Neutral narrator voice. The sagas describe a second landfall west of Helluland, thick with woods and game, later called Markland. Most scholars identify it with Labrador, whose long timbered coasts fit both the direction and the description. Historical fact. An Icelandic annal from 1347 records a Greenland ship arriving in Iceland after sailing from Markland with timber, a small but sturdy confirmation that Norse crews used this forested coast as a lumber source for generations. Historians still argue whether the sailors built seasonal camps here or merely practiced quick land and load visits when weather allowed. You note practical riches everywhere. Straight trunks stand like ranks of spears. Fallen wood lies half-cured. Birch bark peels in scrolls that want to become tinder and baskets. The ground, springy with needles, forgives footsteps. You send a pair to scout the strand, while the rest begin choosing trees with the care of jewelers. Axes bite and echo. Chips fly like pale birds. Resin laces your fingers, and for once you don't mind the stickiness. This is the sound of barns held up and hulls held together. Birdsong stitches the morning into place. Somewhere deeper in the woods, a woodpecker works with the impatience of an inspector. A river mouth darkens the sea just downshore, and you mark it on your mental chart. Fresh water and a slipway in one place are worth a dozen guesses elsewhere. A set of tracks, deer, maybe, ghost along a game trail and vanish into shadows. You move respectfully, as if the place were watching, because it probably is. Joke 2. Clouds of mosquitoes discover you and declare a banquet. A deckhand flaps wildly and announces that the official bird of Markland is, regrettably, a mosquito. The first trees fall, slow as curtains, and the long ship becomes a floating workshop. Sawing, trimming, stacking, each log notched and labeled in the quiet code of shipbuilders. You strip branches and square timbers, planning lengths that will suit beams, strakes, and rafters back home. Neutral narrator voice. Greenland's limited wood forced ingenuity, but even ingenuity bows to material. Places like this were not luxuries, but lifelines. The timber here means warm halls, seaworthy hulls, and tools that don't snap under winter's humorless grin. At the high tide line, you find a tangle of foreign-looking drift. A length of hardwood, unlike the softwoods you're cutting, with a density that suggests stories from farther south. You heft it and file the weight in your mind under later. Quirky tidbit. Centuries later, butternut shells will be found at a Norse site in Newfoundland, a tree that doesn't grow there, hinting at excursions deeper south or trade with people who knew those groves. It's the kind of breadcrumb that makes maps blush. Toward midday, the wind shifts and carries a different thread. Wood smoke, faint as a rumor. You freeze, listen, and taste the air again. A gull cries. A branch ticks against another like a bead on a string. The smoke thins to nothing, then returns, as inconsistent as memory. You signal quiet work and keep axes low. The ship remains half in the water, nose pointed seaward, because prudence is also a tool. Historians still argue whether crews like yours met people here during early timber runs or avoided contact by slipping in and out. For now, you let the question rest. The forest has already offered a yes to what you need. By late afternoon, the beach looks like a carpenter's idea of paradise. Bundled spars lie in even rows, lashed in rafts to tow behind the ship. You run a hand along a planed face, smooth, straight, ready. You imagine these beams not as logs, but as future moments. A door frame a child will race through, a roof ridge that will shake off the year's first snow, a mast that will carry someone else into their rumor. Joke 3. Someone squints down a board and claims he can see home at the other end. You tell him that is called optimism, and he argues it is fine craftsmanship. Either way, it holds. Neutral narrator voice, the saga sequence, Helluland, Markland, Vinland, reads like a sailor's shopping list. Stone for bearings, wood for building, mildness for wintering. Identifications remain debated along exact coastlines, but the functional categories are clear and persistent across texts. What matters to you here is less the label than the logistics. A crew can carry only so much, and wind is a miser. Decisions ride the same line as the surf. Even in abundance, you respect the place. You leave a cut stump smoothed, not jagged, and tuck chips into the soil so the ground won't look wounded. You scratch a simple mark on a rock above the high water line, a reminder, not a boast, and collect cones to dry for kindling and pitch. The river mouth tempts you farther inland, but you set a boundary. No one walks beyond a call's reach. You have learned that forests sometimes fold behind people like curtains, and that getting lost can happen inside your own breath. As the sun leans west, the ship squats lower with its timber belly. The rafts tug the stern like polite dogs. A final patrol downshore nets a few more lengths of drift, and a salvaged spar that seems cut by hands not yours. You turn it over, see no mark, and lay it with the others. The sea keeps secrets generously. You are not owed an explanation. Historical fact. Later Norse references mention repeat voyages to Markland for timber, implying routine rather than accident. The 1347 annal note is a bureaucrat's scribble that outlives the voices of crews, a paper shadow proving that practical traffic continued long after the first thrill of discovery cooled. Historians still argue whether those trips were annual rhythms or opportunistic dashes between storms, but the pattern points to familiarity, the kind that turns edges of maps into footpaths. Dusk finds the forest humming softly, as if the trees hold a song in their sap. You push off on the first of the timber rafts to test the tow, walking it into water until it floats like a promise. The long ship noses seaward, and the pines along the shore darken into a single silhouette, like a city with no lights and better manners. You breathe in a last lungful of resin and salt, and the two smells braid into something you'll be able to call back years from now just by closing your eyes. The oars dip, the rope tightens, the raft follows like a well-trained thought. Night gathers, large and unhurried. Stars kindle above the masthead, and the forest's edge becomes a black hem against the sea. Somewhere beyond that hem lies the next line of the story, and perhaps the next after that. The ship takes the weight of wood and the weight of expectation, with the same creak, and settles into motion. You keep a hand on the tow line, and your gaze on the dark water that points south, toward rumor ripened into plan. The sea runs calmer as the coast slides past, and each day the horizon loosens another secret. The gray cliffs mellow, the tree line thickens, the air itself feels less like a dare and more like an invitation. By late afternoon of the third day, you smell it before you see it. Sweetness, faint but undeniable, carried in the wind like a rumor that wants to be proven. The crew notices too. Heads lift, shoulders ease, laughter returns. You lean over the gunwale and let the air write its letter directly to your chest. Then, as the sun dips, a low peninsula unfurls. Hills roll gently down to sandy strands, dotted with shrubs that glint as if jeweled in the light. You beach the ship at a sheltered cove, the water shallow and forgiving, and step into a world that feels different in its bones. Grass grows high, the soil springy and kind. Birds swirl above, busy and unafraid. A river snakes inland, its banks thick with brush that twitches with small animals. Someone plucks a cluster of berries, purple juice staining fingers, and the sweetness nearly startles you. You grin despite yourself. This is Vinland. Historical fact. According to the sagas, Vinland was described as a place of fertile soil, abundant game, and famously, wild grapes. Most scholars identify it with coastal Newfoundland, particularly the site at Lonso Meadows, where archaeological remains confirm a Norse presence around the year 1000. Historians still argue whether the grapes were literal European-style vines or another berry like gooseberry or crowberry, misinterpreted by storytellers. Whatever the truth, the name Vinland, Wineland, stuck. The discovery feels like an answered riddle. You follow the river upstream where vines climb across shrubs and trees in loose, playful tangles. A sailor stuffs a handful of fruit into his mouth and declares, through purple teeth, that Odin clearly favors him. Joke 1. Another swears the grapes taste like victory, while a third points out they mostly taste like more grapes. The laughter echoes strangely in the stillness, like the land itself is chuckling along. You return to the shore and begin scouting. The ground is rich, softer than Greenland's thin pastures. Straight timber stands nearby, less imposing than Markland's forests, but easier to work. Rabbits dart through the grass, deer flicker between trees. Neutral narrator voice. These resources, combined with the mildness of climate compared to Greenland, made Vinland seem almost enchanted. For Norse settlers accustomed to scraping hay from thin meadows, this was abundance. Quirky tidbit. Some versions of the sagas say Leif's men got tipsy sampling the grapes, convincing themselves they'd discovered the secret to eternal feasts. It's likely exaggeration, but the image of Vikings stumbling merrily through berry bushes is too charming to discard. Work begins immediately. Turf is cut for huts, stones stacked into hearths. Fires snap and smoke rises, curling into a sky that seems pleased to carry it. You lay down a bedding of grass inside a hut, softer than furs, and find yourself sinking gratefully. The air is warmer here. You dream without shivering. Joke 2. Someone sighs that he might actually survive the winter without turning into a human popsicle, and the crew agrees this could ruin Greenland's entire reputation for character-building hardship. The days unfold with the rhythm of plenty. Nets brim with fish, traps with game. Berries stain every smile. You lash together beams for storage sheds and carve symbols into corner posts as quiet signatures. Neutral narrator voice. Excavations at Lonso Meadows revealed traces of ironworking, suggesting Norse crews repaired or built tools here, making the site more than just a picnic stop. Whether permanent colony or seasonal outpost, Vinland's footprint is written in the soil as surely as in saga verse. As autumn deepens, you gather more grapes and hang them in bunches inside the huts, where they shrivel into something sharper, richer, more potent. A sailor pours water over a batch and insists it's wine. Everyone drinks, coughs, and declares it delicious. Joke 3. One man announces he'll open the first Vinland winery. Another points out that one barrel of slightly fizzy grape water may not sustain a business model. They drink anyway, because why not? You explore farther inland, marking paths with stacked stones. Gentle valleys open, dotted with ponds that catch the sky like mirrors. Birds scatter in flocks, their wings a steady applause. Every step makes you wonder if this is the land to stay, not just to visit. But the air also holds mystery. You find footprints, broad, human, pressed into soft soil near the river. They don't belong to your crew. You exchange glances, silent but alert. The sagas whisper of Skraelings, native peoples, sometimes trading, sometimes fighting. For now, the prints simply remind you. This land has voices older than yours. Night falls warmer than you expect. Stars crowd the sky in unfamiliar constellations, and the river hums softly beside the camp. You lie on your back, belly full, breath easy. The word Vinland rolls around your tongue, rich and satisfying, like the fruit that gave it life. This place is no rumor, no half-glimpsed horizon. It is real, and it is generous. Whether it will stay generous, no one knows. Historians still argue whether the Norse intended permanent settlement here or saw it only as a seasonal station. For now, lying on grass instead of stone, you don't care. You close your eyes, thinking of mornings filled with grapes, evenings with fires, and winters that might finally feel less like punishment. Morning seeps into the camp slowly, golden and unhurried. You wake on a bed of grass that actually seems to want you alive, unlike the frozen turf back in Greenland. Smoke drifts lazily from new-built hearths, and the smell of roasted fish mingles with the faint tartness of berries drying on cords. The river keeps its promise, murmuring beside the huts, a low note that steadies hands and tempers. Today is for building in earnest, because plenty is only generous if you give it walls. You set crews by tasks. Some cut turf in neat bricks, stacking them like dark books. Others notch pine for frames, a few shuttle stone from the beach for hearths. The huts take shape in a row just above the floodline, timber ribs, turf jackets, smoke holes like patient eyes. Inside, rushes and grasses make bedding that sighs when you sit. Joke 1. Someone declares the decor Nordic rustic, which, translated, means whatever doesn't blow away. It earns a grin, then a fresh armload of sod, neutral narrator voice. Excavations at Lanceau Meadows uncovered multiple turf and timber buildings and a small forge, clear evidence of a Norse base around the year 1000. That forge produced a modest bloom of iron from bog ore, enough to repair rivets and tools, not enough to outfit an army. Historians still argue whether the complex was a seasonal camp for exploration or a starter colony meant to test the climate and resources before families followed. Either way, the ground remembers hammer blows. By midday, a corner of the camp sounds like a breathless metal lesson. You and 2 others dig a shallow pit, line it with stone, and assemble a low clay shaft. Charcoal glows, bellows wheeze, ore nodules darken, sweat, and soften. When the furnace opens, a sponge of iron slumps out, ugly and wonderful. You beat it on a flat stone, driving out slag until a real bar lies there, warm as a saved secret. Tools go round for sharpening. Nicked edges become promises again. Quirky tidbit. Some later storytellers insisted a few men tried to make wine at once, hanging clusters over the hearth and blessing a tub of sweetened water, then swore it tasted like victory. More likely, it tasted like warm optimism with seeds. Game is generous. Lines tug with fish. Snares collect rabbits by dusk. Deer track the edge of the trees, and sometimes leave behind meat and hides if your patience holds steady. Berries stain fingers purple and lips foolish. You start drying strips of venison on racks near the huts, while sparks float up like stubborn stars. Neutral narrator voice. Compared to Greenland, this coast offers a longer growing season and a gentler shoulder to lean on. But winter still has opinions. Preparing for it becomes the daily grammar. Cut, stack, smoke, salt, mend. Cold begins to practice on you in the evenings, testing the hems of cloaks, poking at door gaps. You pack moss around thresholds, hang spare hides across entries, and teach the smoke to find the roof hole before it throttles the room. Someone invents a draft test by dangling a feather and awarding points when it flutters in a new direction. The winner receives the honor of stuffing more moss. Joke 2. The prize is not popular, but the doorways improve. Days shorten with a quiet that feels both calm and slightly conspiratorial. The river slows. Ice writes brief notes along the banks in the mornings. Your breath starts leaving signatures in the air. The huts grow cozy, and with coziness comes the ancient art of minor annoyances. Boots in the wrong corner become epics. A missing awl becomes a scandal. Snoring evolves into a camp-wide referendum. Leaf moderates with even hands and small nods. The ship stays trimmed and ready below the tide line, a standing decision in case the coast changes its mood. Storms arrive as rehearsals for deeper cold, wind roaring out of nowhere, rain slashing sideways, then a sudden sweep of calm that feels like a held breath. You learn the sound of good walls, a low hum, a complaint, then settled quiet. You learn the sound of bad walls, too, and fix them in the next bright hour. Historical fact. Turf construction with timber frames and sod cladding was standard Norse practice across the North Atlantic. Properly made, such houses hold heat and shrug off weather that would bully lighter structures into firewood. Between chores, you explore. Gentle valleys offer ponds where geese loaf like dignitaries. You mark stone cairns along paths, careful to keep the camp's heart close. One afternoon, you find another footprint by the river, broad, human, not yours, angled away into brush. You let it rest in your sight and in your memory. This is a shared coast, not a blank one. The huts glow warm behind you, but the open question walks ahead on soft ground. Historians still argue whether first contacts in these parts were mostly trade or tension at first sight. The work is good, which is to say it is honest and repetitive and full of small victories. A new roofline that doesn't drip over the sleeping bench. A storage pit that stays dry after a night of careless rain. A barrel that stops leaking after you charm it with pitch and muttered kindness. Joke 3. You christen the repaired cask St. Cooper and promise to light a candle if it stays watertight. It burps approvingly and then behaves. Yet plenty brings its own puzzles. If this place is so kind, why didn't you see smoke rising before yours? Are you wintering where others move only in summer? or did you miss their homes just inland? Neutral narrator voice. The sagas mention grapes and self-sown wheat, but those words may have stretched to cover berries and native grains unfamiliar to northern tongues. Abundance could have been seasonal, misunderstood, or simply different from what you expected. Uncertainty sits at your table like a quiet relative. A cold snap presses the question harder. For 3 days, the wind combs the peninsula flat. The river salts its edges with ice. Gulls fold into themselves and let the air pass by. Inside, you count food with your eyes. Dried fish, smoked meat, baskets of nuts and berries, sacks of meal brought from Greenland. The numbers nod, but they do not grin. Someone wonders aloud if the camp should split. Some stay to guard stores. Others scout farther south for even milder coves and more generous woods. The room considers and falls into a useful silence, where caution can be heard clearly. Leif sets a rule. No wandering beyond the cairns until the first real snow tells you which paths the land prefers. It is a fair call. He also orders a second round of ironworking before the charcoal stock shrinks. Edge after edge brightens under the hammer. Tools are votes. The more you can fix, the longer you can choose to stay. Night pulls up earlier each day. You settle into winter mines, slow, deliberate, attentive to small comforts. A carved spoon with a good balance. A cloak hem stitched true. A joke at the right moment that keeps a worry from growing claws. You sit by the hearth and listen to resin pop in the fire, to the river's muffled voice, to sleep making its unhurried approach. Whether this becomes home or a page you turn, you cannot yet tell. Outside, the wind decides to show mercy. Stars appear in a tight crowd, and the air turns crisp enough to bite, but not cruel. The camp breathes in one rhythm, fires easing, huts settling, the ship rocking faintly at her mooring like a patient animal. You close your eyes and feel the weight of the roof above you, the good weight that says you belong to this hour at least, if not to this coast forever. In the quiet, you admit a truth that feels both simple and complicated. Staying wise is different from leaving brave, and the land will ask you to choose which kind of courage you prefer. The first real snow arrives not as a whisper, but as a chorus. Flakes thick enough to smudge the horizon, drifting sideways in curtains that erase the line between sea and sky. You wake to find the camp muffled, the huts crouched under white cloaks, the ship itself tucked against the cove, as though trying not to be noticed. Inside, the hearth glows steady, but your eyes drift often to the river bank where those earlier footprints were found. The memory of them lingers like smoke that never quite leaves the air. Days fall into a rhythm of caution. You cut more wood, fetch water, and check traps, never far from the cairns that mark safety's edge. Then one morning, while gathering brushwood, you hear it. Voices. Not the low murmur of your own crew, but unfamiliar syllables, quick and musical, weaving through the trees. You freeze, heart pounding, and watch as 3 figures step into the clearing. They wear furs stitched in ways different from yours, carry bows of unfamiliar shape, and pause the moment they see you. Leif comes quickly, hands open, posture calm. The strangers watch him, silent but not hostile. Neutral narrator voice. The sagas call these people skrælings, a term likely used broadly for indigenous groups encountered in Vinland. Most modern scholars suggest these first contacts were with ancestors of the Beothuk, or related peoples. Historians still argue whether early meetings leaned toward trade, wary standoffs, or brief skirmishes colored later by memory. You lower your axe and raise a length of cloth instead, a bright scrap that catches light. The strangers study it. Then one steps forward, placing a bundle of animal pelts on the snow. Exchange begins without words, the universal grammar of gesture. Fur for cloth, stone tools for small iron nails, berries for a few jingling trinkets. The mood is careful, but no arrow flies. Joke 1. One of your crew offers a spoon as if it were treasure, and when the strangers actually take it, he declares himself master of international diplomacy. Everyone chuckles, including, maybe, the strangers, though it could have been the wind. Over the next days, brief visits repeat. The strangers arrive in 2s or 3s, accept bits of red cloth, and leave behind bundles of skins. The camp grows richer in hides, warmer in bedding, and more curious. Neutral narrator voice. The sagas describe trading milk, cloth, and iron goods for pelts and food, noting the indigenous people valued red cloth especially. The details may be embroidered, but they ring with the truth of barter across cultural distance. Then, tension. One afternoon, a group arrives larger than before, eyes sharper, gestures quicker. A bowstring twangs by accident, or by message, and everyone stiffens. Leif steps forward again, calm but firm, raising his hand with palm out. The moment stretches taut. You hear your own breath in the cold. Then, slowly, the strangers lower their weapons and retreat. No word is spoken, but the silence they leave behind feels heavier than any shout. Historical fact. Norse accounts do mention both peaceful trade and violent conflict, with one saga describing an attack that drove settlers to abandon Vinland. Quirky tidbit. In one dramatic tale, Leif's sister Freydis supposedly frightened attackers by baring her breast, striking it with a sword, and shouting defiance, an image that lives halfway between history and theater. Historians still argue whether this was ever more than saga dramatization, but the story illustrates how memory reshapes events into legend. Around the fire that night, the crew whispers uneasily. Some want to pack the ship and sail for home before arrows grow more common. Others argue the land is too rich to leave after such brief taste. Leif listens, but does not decide aloud. Joke 2. One man suggests building a fence taller than the forest to keep trouble out. Another mutters that would take more wood than the entire Markland coast. Even fear cannot resist a laugh. The next morning, you patrol cautiously. Tracks circle near the cairns, closer than before. A pile of broken branches lies arranged strangely, almost like a sign. You cannot read it, but you feel its message. We see you. Neutral narrator voice. Encounters like these, ambiguous in both sagas and archaeology, remind us that contact was never neutral. It was weighted by curiosity, need, fear, and difference. What seems like opportunity for one people may appear intrusion to another. Still, trade continues in small bursts. Red cloth vanishes quickly into strangers' hands, leaving you with pelts soft as sighs. Iron rivets disappear too, prized in a world that does not mine metal. In return, you gain skins thick enough to stitch new cloaks, and even a carved bone needle of elegant design. Proof that skill is a universal language. Joke 3. One sailor insists the needle will sew the world back together. If it breaks, another suggests it at least mends socks better than his clumsy fingers. Winter deepens, and the question sharpens with it. Can you stay here safely? Can you leave without regret? The huts are warm, the land generous, but the air feels watched. Every crack of branch in the forest, every shadow across snow, reminds you that this place already has its people, its stories, its rules. Whether you are guest or intruder remains undecided, and the decision may not be yours to make. At night, you lie awake, listening to the wind chase itself through the river valley. The fire flickers, shadows dance, and you close your eyes against thoughts you cannot settle. Vinland is abundance, but abundance does not guarantee belonging. Tomorrow may bring more trade, or it may bring silence, or it may bring a bow drawn tight. For now, you rest under a turf roof, warmed by fur, fed by grapes and fish, and tempered by the knowledge that discovery is not the same as welcome. The snow eases though winter still holds its grip. Huts creak with thawing ice, and the river groans under cracking sheets that drift seaward. Inside the camp, the mood shifts. Walls feel less like fortresses and more like fences around restless hearts. Close quarters sharpen old arguments you thought had fallen silent. Leif calls a meeting on the strand, the thing under open sky. People gather with cloaks pulled tight, faces lean, eyes bright. A circle forms around a flat rock that serves as table. Some urge staying. The soil is kind, the woods honest. Others press for leaving. The ship is sound, stores are solid, and the neighbors watch with quiet eyes. Joke 1. Someone suggests electing 3 captains, so at least one will be right. The idea sinks faster than an anchor. Voices braid into positions. Boat builders want another season, more timber, more sheds, a better forge. Hunters argue for southward scouting to find a cove so mild winter forgets to arrive. Traders point to red cloth disappearing like smoke in barter and argue for quick voyages, light loads, steady profit. Freydis folds her arms. When she speaks, it is simple. Hesitation invites mischief. Decide and act. Neutral narrator voice. The sagas hint that later expeditions, Karlsefni's foremost, arrived with families, cattle, and the serious intention of staying. They also preserve long arguments about leadership, shares, and how to read the land. Historians still argue whether separate voyages overlapped here or whether stories from different times were stitched into one crowded winter. A practical list settles the room. You inventory food, count tools, check seams and sailcloth. The engine of the camp, cut, stack, mend, keeps ticking while talk chooses a direction. Quirky tidbit. To cool tempers, someone proposes a Hnefatafl tournament, the old board game with kings and shields. Winner to pick the next day's chore. It ends in a draw when lunch arrives on move 7, and the board becomes a serving tray. Dispute blooms in corners. Who mends the ship's warp in the cold? Who checks traps and who spins tales? One man swears another has hoarded the best rope. The accused produces the coil with a flourish and a knot so clever you clap before you complain. Joke 2. A scribe vows to record minutes on a spare plank. Later, the plank becomes kindling, and you admit minutes that warm fingers aren't wasted. The thing reconvenes after noon. Leif lays out a 3-point path. An advance crew scouts 2 days south. A second keeps the forge running. A third packs non-essential stores in case a fast departure becomes wisdom. No one loves every part, which is precisely why the plan will work. You volunteer for scouting because arguments sound smaller at a distance measured in waves. Neutral narrator voice. Leadership at the Norse edge was persuasive, not absolute. Agreements made in assemblies, obligations traded like favors, reputation as valuable as iron. Historical fact. Across Norse settlements, the thing was a public forum where disputes were aired and laws affirmed. You set out with 3 others at first light, the shore unwinding in quiet curves. Dunes lie low as sleeping seals. Brush is stitched with deer paths. You find a cove with sand soft as a promise and a small river that does not freeze at the lips. You also find signs. A fish rack abandoned but not forgotten, footprints overlapping like conversations, a ring of stones around ashes gone gray. Back at camp, the news lands like mixed weather. The cove could cradle a season, but signs say someone else already knows it. The discussion breaks into eddies. Trade, then build. Build, then negotiate, or negotiate by building beyond sight. Freitas proposes a bolder reading. Settle where you are strongest. Leif trims options until the shape that remains looks survivable. Tensions flash over smaller stakes because large stakes loom. A barrel of dried berries has mysteriously lightened. The culprit turns out to be an apprentice with purple lips and heroic apologies. 2 hunters argue over a bow whose string keeps vanishing. A child admits she has been using it to practice cat's cradle. Joke 3. One man swears he can hear the forest asking for a seat at the meeting. Someone pulls a stump over and pats it, and for a moment, policy feels simple. The strangers visit once more, standing well outside the cairns. No goods change hands. Their eyes travel from your huts to the ship and back again. One points south, then to the sea, a gesture you read as both invitation and warning. You nod in slow rhythm, the way you would to a skittish animal. We see you. We are not trying to chase you from your own door. Neutral narrator voice. Karlsefni's saga tells of trading that soured after a frightened bull bellowed and scattered negotiations. Whether that specific scene ever played out, the larger truth is simple. Misunderstandings scale quickly when cultures share no language but urgency. Historians still argue whether flare-ups like these ended European wintering here, or were just one more log on a fire already set to burn down. By the time the river runs freer, the decision has ripened. The camp will not vanish, it will be lightened. A core stays to keep sheds and hearths in repair. The rest will ride the first long stretch of clear weather back to Greenland with timber and news. You help seal casks, write tallies with a charred stick, and fold the camp into 2 halves, now and next. Night comes soft, carrying the part of quarrel that matters, the one you keep privately. Are you leaving because you are chased or because you are choosing? Will the story you tell at Brattahlid be one of prudence or of surrender? You stow your doubts the way you stow coils of rope, tidy, reachable, not erased. In the last meeting by the Law Rock, Leif speaks briefly. He thanks the land without pretending it loves you back, and thanks the people whose paths you crossed without pretending you understood them. Courage, he says, wears 2 faces, going farther and knowing when to turn for home. The words settle into the cold like good pegs. The group exhales as one. When the stars come out, you walk the beach and listen to low surf telling its patient story. Behind you, the huts breathe. Ahead, the ship waits with the calm of a tool sharpened and set down. Tomorrow will be lists and lifting, the choreography of departure itself. For now, the disputes have cooled into decisions, the dreams into directions. The horizon in the east feels a fraction closer, as if the sea has already agreed to carry you part of the way back. The morning comes with a bite of frost, sharp enough to remind you that even generosity wears limits. The huts smoke one last time, with a fullness that feels ceremonial, almost like the land itself is giving you a farewell nod. The crew works quickly, each movement practiced, each bundle tied as if haste might soften the leaving. Piles of timber are lashed into neat rafts, iron tools packed carefully, skins folded against damp. The ship creaks impatiently at the waterline, a horse ready to run. Leif checks every seam, every rope, every cask. His eyes measure both the hull and the horizon. The others glance toward the cairns one last time, half expecting to see figures emerge. None come, only the quiet stamp of gulls on the sand. Neutral narrator voice. Both sagas describe return voyages to Greenland after the Vinland ventures, though with different reasons: conflict, dwindling supplies, or simple prudence. Historians still argue whether any group truly planned permanent settlement, or if Vinland was always intended as an outpost of convenience. You push the long ship into surf, boots splashing cold, and climb aboard as the oars fall into rhythm. The raft of timber tugs obediently behind, logs bumping like companions unwilling to be left behind. The shore shrinks, grape-laden valleys fading into a line, then a shadow, then only a thought. Joke 1. Someone sighs and declares they'll miss the wine, and another mutters that calling it wine was generous in the first place. The laughter sits easy, lighter than it has in weeks. The sea greets you with open hands. Winds fill the sail, and the prow slices forward. You keep the coast to port as long as you can, marking landmarks to chart for return. A headland shaped like a crouching bear, a waterfall that threads silver against stone. Neutral narrator voice. Norse navigation often relied on such sailing marks, distinct features memorized and retold in verse, forming a kind of oral map that lived longer than ink. But soon, coastline falls away, and you are back in the vast blank. Days stack like shields, one against another. Some are merciful, the ocean rocking you like a cradle. Others bite with spray that freezes in beards and stiffens cloaks into armor. Still, the ship holds, and so do you. Quirky tidbit. Later, storytellers claimed one voyage drifted so far off course that the crew spotted whales spouting rainbow-colored spray. Was it exaggeration, or the northern lights reflected on mist? Historians still argue, but the image makes your frozen breath feel brighter. Storms roll out of nowhere, waves slamming with fists that rattle ribs and timbers alike. You cling to your oar, arms burning, mind narrowed to the rhythm. Pull, breathe, pull. Leif shouts orders, voice steady, and somehow steadier still is the ship herself, flexing, bending, never breaking. Joke 2. Someone yells into the gale that if they survive, they'll never complain about Greenland's weather again. Another hollers back, liar. The crew laughs mid-wave, a raw, necessary defiance. One dawn, the storm passes and leaves behind a sky scrubbed clean. You scan the horizon with aching eyes, and there it is. A smudge of green-gray, small but stubborn. Land, Greenland. Relief floods the deck, heavier than any sea spray. You could cry, but instead you grin, because grinning is lighter. Historical fact. Leif returned to Greenland with timber, tales of fertile lands, and, according to some accounts, shipwrecked sailors he had rescued on the way, earning him the byname the Lucky. The coastline grows teeth of rock, then softens into the familiar embrace of fjords. Smoke rises from turf halls crouched against the wind. You can almost smell home cooking. under the tang of salt. Boots crunch on shore again, this time with a weight that feels both weary and proud. You've carried back not only wood and skins, but also stories that will ripple farther than waves. Neighbors gather fast, wide-eyed at the timber and the tales. Children climb onto logs as if they were dragons. Women run fingers along straight-grained planks as though touching treasure. You catch yourself smiling, realizing that for Greenlanders, wood is treasure. Leif speaks simply, laying out what was found: stone, forests, fertile valleys. He does not exaggerate. He doesn't need to. The crew's faces, sunburnt and wind-etched, are evidence enough. Joke 3. One old farmer squints at the grape-stained tunic of a sailor and asks if he fought a wine barrel to the death. The sailor nods solemnly and says, "It was a fair match." Laughter rolls across the hall, warming the cold stone more than the fire. Neutral narrator voice. Vinland's memory will now fold into Greenland's sagas, whispered into Iceland's halls, carried east to Norway. Yet already disputes will begin. How far, how fertile, how safe. Some will dream of returning, others will dismiss it as distraction. Historians still argue whether the Norse saw Vinland as an extension of home or a distant novelty. But what is certain is this: they went and they came back, and the story did not sink. At night you sit outside, watching the stars over Brattahlid. The logs stacked high in the yard look like silent witnesses, each one a verse in a saga too new to be finished. You breathe deep, the air familiar but tinged with foreign sweetness. For a heartbeat you feel both here and there. Home in Greenland, heart in Vinland. You understand that voyages don't end at the shoreline. They end when the stories stop being told. And these stories are only just beginning. The long nights of Greenland settle in again, but this winter feels different. Around the hearths, voices rise not only with the usual sagas of gods and heroes, but with fresh tales of lands across the sea. You sit shoulder to shoulder with neighbors, listening as the stories of Helluland, Markland, and Vinland spread like sparks from the fire. Children lean forward, wide-eyed. Elders stroke their beards and frown thoughtfully. Already, the journey has grown a second life in words. Neutral narrator voice. The Norse had little parchment and less ink. Their history traveled in sound, tales told and retold across winters, preserved through memory. By the 13th century, these stories became part of written sagas. The saga of the Greenlanders and the saga of Eric the Red. Historians still argue how much is faithful record and how much is storyteller's embroidery. But even exaggerations preserve a kernel of truth. You hear how the storytellers polish each account. One tale paints Helluland's slabs as so vast you could dine on them like plates set for giants. Another makes Markland's forests so endless that the axes themselves begged for rest. And Vinland, Vinland, its grapes are now sweet enough to fill rivers, its grass tall enough to hide horses, its winters so gentle you could nap through them. Joke 1. A boy pipes up. If the grass is that tall, how do you find your boots? The hall erupts with laughter, and the tale rolls on undisturbed. Timber, the most solid proof, stands stacked in yards. Beams are hauled into new halls, planks cut into ships. Each strike of the axe adds rhythm to the words being spun. People point at the wood, nodding. See, the story has bones. Historical fact, Timber imported from lands like Markland was prized in Greenland for construction and ship repair, and written records from Iceland even mention such shipments. The wood makes the saga credible, a tangible relic of a place across the horizon. Yet even as stories swell, doubts flicker. Some mutter that Vinland is too far, too strange, that the strangers there watch with wary eyes. Others insist that riches demand risk, and that turning away would insult the gods who offered such gifts. Neutral narrator voice. Sagas themselves preserve this tension, half celebrating, half warning. Quirky tidbit. One Icelandic writer later claimed Vinland lay only 2 days' sail west of Ireland, a geographical impossibility that shows how rumor and pride twisted maps into knots. Historians still argue whether some storytellers deliberately bent the tale to make it sound closer, safer, or simply more magical. Leif listens to all of this with the patience of stone. When pressed, he shrugs and says only, "We saw what we saw." His restraint adds weight to the firelit bragging around him. Joke 2. Someone asks if he at least brought back a vineyard. Leif replies dryly that the barrels didn't fit on deck. The hall roars, wine or no wine. The sagas slip quickly into song. Skalds weave verses that praise both daring and luck, rhymes about sails flapping like gull wings, about berries staining lips purple with destiny. The words lodge in memory, where they will outlive the men who sang them. Neutral narrator voice. In Norse culture, skaldic poetry was both art and record. A good stanza preserved events longer than carved runes could. The Vinland voyages thus found immortality less in stone markers and more in the rhythm of verse. Yet shadows stretch with the firelight. A woman whispers that the Skraelings might follow across the sea. A farmer wonders if Vinland's winters hide fangs yet unseen. A child asks if the grapes will still grow when the gods change the seasons. The questions drift like smoke, without answers. Historians still argue whether Norse withdrawals from Vinland were prompted more by conflict, climate, or simply the stubborn gravity of home. Joke 3. One sailor insists the real reason for leaving was that someone lost the cork for the wine barrel, and without corks, no colony could stand. The absurdity earns groans and chuckles, but also relief. Laughter is the oldest insurance against worry. Over time, the stories harden into shapes. Helluland becomes the land of stone, Markland the land of wood, Vinland the land of sweetness. 3 names, 3 verses, 3 steps of a journey remembered more clearly in mouths than in maps. Generations will repeat them until listeners believe they could walk those shores themselves. Neutral narrator voice. Archaeology confirms part of the tale. The Norse did reach North America. Yet the sagas remain our primary narrative, equal parts memory and myth. They show how experience becomes echo, echo becomes story, and story becomes history. The wood beams holding up halls in Greenland are silent, but the sagas shout. The fire dies low. You sit watching embers, listening as voices fall to murmurs. Already you sense that your part of the story is over, and the rest belongs to those who tell it. The stones of Helluland, the trees of Markland, the grapes of Vinland, all now live more strongly in words than in your hands. And perhaps that is how they will travel farthest. Spring stirs faintly along Greenland's fjords, though ice still guards the inlets like a stubborn old watchman. The halls are busy with talk, more alive with stories than with sheep or hay. You sit at a gathering where voices rise and fall, each one claiming a detail of the western lands as if holding a jewel. Some insist the stone slabs of Helluland gleamed in the sun like mirrors. Others swear Markland's forests could rebuild every ship in Norway. And Vinland, Vinland, its name alone is now spoken with a smile, the syllables ripened like fruit. Neutral narrator voice. Vinland's place in history is both solid and shadowed. Archaeological discoveries at Lonso Meadows in Newfoundland prove Norse explorers reached North America around the year 1000. Timber buildings, a forge, and iron nails whisper confirmation in the soil. Historical fact. This is the earliest widely accepted evidence of Europeans crossing the Atlantic. Yet much remains uncertain. Historians still argue whether those settlements were short-lived way stations, bold colonies that faltered, or experimental footholds abandoned after conflict and hardship. The sagas keep the flame alive. Skalds chant verses where Leif Erikson becomes the lucky, where Freydis stands unyielding, where ships skim horizons few dare imagine. Children play by pretending to row to Vinland, their laughter pulling rumor into game. But memory is not map, and even as the stories bloom, details slip like water through fingers. Quirky tidbit. Medieval geographers sometimes placed Vinland on maps beside imaginary islands, like High Brazil or Great Ireland, blending fact with legend until truth itself sailed in strange company. You walk the shore, watching the tide climb and fall. Logs from Markland lean against hulls. Beams cut square from Vinland forests hold up roofs that might last generations. The land itself carries proof, even if the words keep shifting. Joke 1. A neighbor pats a timber beam and says, "This is the only grapevine I believe in." The hall laughs, though no one denies the sweetness of the tale. Neutral narrator voice. In later centuries, other sailors would stumble across the western lands, Basque whalers, Portuguese fishermen, and of course, Columbus much later. But the Norse left only whispers, artifacts scattered like footprints in the sand. Historians still argue why the voyages did not blossom into permanent colonies. Was it the sheer distance? Thin population in Greenland? Conflicts with indigenous peoples who rightfully defended their lands? Or simply that Europe's gaze shifted elsewhere? The debate endures like an unanswered riddle. You find yourself thinking that perhaps the purpose was never empire, never permanence. Perhaps it was proof that the horizon was not a wall but a door, that the sea could be crossed, that courage could be carried west and still find ground. The legacy may not be farms or cities, but the reminder that boundaries are softer than they look. Joke 2. Someone insists the greatest discovery of Vinland wasn't grapes or timber, but the invention of the world's first transatlantic hangover. History doesn't confirm this, but the campfire certainly does. The tales stretch farther now. Traders carry them east, weaving Vinland into conversations in Iceland, in Norway, even into the ears of kings. Some believe, others scoff, yet each retelling bends the story a little, polishing it until legend and memory shine the same. Neutral narrator voice. Centuries later, scholars puzzled over these sagas, unsure whether to treat them as myth. Only when archaeology uncovered turf walls in Newfoundland did the echoes finally find their anchor. Joke 3. One scholar centuries after will call Vinland possibly apocryphal, to which you imagine Leif replying, "Possibly, but I still have the grapes." The thought makes you smile as you watch the gulls circle the fjord. So what remains? beams holding up halls, nails black with rust beneath northern soil, grapes transmuted into verse, a woman's defiance in a saga that still shocks audiences, and the image of ships daring the edge of the known world, turning rumors into coastlines. Neutral narrator voice. Vinland lingers not only in history, but in imagination, inspiring explorers, poets, and dreamers. Its memory proves that discovery is not erased by failure, nor weakened by doubt. Instead, it waits, steady as a headland, for each generation to find again. You sit by the fjord at dusk, the water smoothing into polished silver, the air quiet as a kept secret. The horizon lies calm, yet you feel the tug of it, the same tug that pulled sails west 1,000 years ago. The sagas will carry that tug long after you sleep, ensuring the story never ends where the sea begins. And now, as the voices fade and the firelight dims, let the story soften. Picture the sea not as a restless frontier, but as a broad, slow breath, rising and falling beneath the stars. Imagine the ships drawn up on quiet shores, sails furled, oars resting, their timbers creaking like sleepers shifting in their beds. The storm has passed, the work is done, and all that remains is the hush of water against stone. The sagas you've heard tonight, of Leif, of Fridas, of Helluland, Markland, and Vinland, are not only about discovery, but about the rhythm of courage. They remind us that each horizon, however distant, is simply a question waiting to be asked. And sometimes the answer is not a city, nor a conquest, nor permanence, but the gentle assurance that we can go farther than we thought, and still find our way home. So let your mind drift now, like a ship rocking softly at anchor. The oars are shipped, the fires banked low, the voices of the crew wrapped in dreams. You lie on the grass of Vinland, or on the turf of Greenland, or simply in the safe harbor of your own bed, listening to the eternal tide. The stars above watch without hurry, and the air carries only peace. Rest easy. The sea will keep its secrets until morning. The story will wait for you. And the horizon will still be there, patient and wide, when you next decide to sail. The end. Sweet dreams.